Welcome to Living in Connection, where we explore the nature of physical and non-physical reality and what that means in your life.
Well, hi again. We were just chatting about disappointment, and Frank and I were talking. Hello and welcome again. I'm Dirk Dunning, and this is my friend Frank DeMarco. We were talking about disappointment before, and that led us off into another idea that as we've gone through working with the guys upstairs, or guidance, or however you want to think about it, one of the aspects that we run into is an ambiguity about what's really going on. Are we in a state of connection, or are we, caught in our mind? What's happening here? And Frank, I think you had a war story you wanted to tell along that line.
I will, yes, at one point. But I want to say first, one of the big advantages that I brought to this was that I don't need to define things and I don't need to have things all clear in my mind. And so the fact that it was sort of soupy worked for me, because I didn't have to overcome, or didn't have to try and force the facts into certain framework, and then I didn't have to undo it when it didn't work. But at one point I've talked about how my only models were Edgar Cayce and Jane Roberts, actually mostly Cayce, and my experience did not fit. So I had to find what actually did work. I think one of the things that we decided we would talk about here is, as you know, the difference between local Dirk and local Dirk in connection with non-3D Dirk, and local Dirk and non-3D Dirk in connection with affiliated guidance of which they're in resonance. There is no boundary there. There is no way of knowing. It's a matter of how you define it, but how you define it may have nothing to do with reality. It's really more like a fog.
Exactly.
In my mind. And I think we can both tell people it's not a problem. Once you stop trying to tell yourself that you have to know where that bright idea came from, and you just look at the idea itself and say, well, is this a good idea or not? You solve a lot. You avoid a lot of problems.
When you give up believing that it has to come from a burning bush on the hill and recognize it can come from anywhere, and it can feel like it's your local self, it can feel like it's something else, and live with that ambiguity.
Yes, because those are questions that don't matter. They really don't matter. And now it really may have been a burning bush. The burning bush may really have been a projection of spirit into the matter, which was it Moses, whoever it was who saw the burning bush. I mean, it may have been, to all extents and purposes, it may have been exactly how it was reported. I think it's more likely that was the best analogy they could think of to try to explain something they couldn't explain. But it doesn't really matter. Your point is right. If it can be used and it can be more or less trusted, and I say more or less because, like everything else in life, a little verification is always a good thing. But if it can be used and if it can be trusted, and if it's helpful, why do you need to determine whether it was you or them? It's not like it's a legal contract.
Go ahead.
It's not a big war story. It's a little war story. But I had made a set of bookshelves for my daughter and her husband. And the way I make bookshelves, I had a router to route into the verticals to make a really good connection and then screw them in sideways. Well, I had sent them all the lumber, and I would have to come and put it together. I forget why that was. It may have been that I couldn't fit all the lumber, all the pieces in my car, but for whatever reason they had it. Well, when I got there, they'd had the bright idea of lacquering or varnishing them, I suppose, right? The problem with that is you have a straight board like this, and now it's like this. It's curved. because it warped, and you can't fit a curved piece into a straight router cut. So I'm looking at it and I'm going, well, now. And then I wandered toward my car, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I just followed it. I looked in the trunk, found my axle jack, and then I knew what to do. And so I fastened the only one that would fasten, which is the bottom. Then I attached the axle jack to push against the next one to force it into the slot. And when it could do that, then I could tack it in with the sides, then put the axle jack on the next one. And it was a kind of a dumb solution. It worked. It was a what do you call it? I always use the word horseback, but people have a different word for it. It's a
Rube Goldberg,
something like that, or half baked, or other expressions like that. But it worked. I mean, and that's all I really care about. But I tried to explain to my daughter. I said, I don't know. The guys upstairs are telling me to go over and look in the trunk. And, and she's looking at me really cross-eyed. Well, was that really the guys upstairs, or was it another part of myself that was more intuitive? Was it something I had learned from my father, years before? Who knows? And who cares? It worked. And that's all that matters. And it wasn't, the last thing, it didn't come with bells and whistles. It was just something you had to figure out. And that, as you know, explaining to people that all of this stuff is just normal and not woo-woo is a hard thing.
Well, and one we haven't talked about in this whole series, I'd like to talk a little bit about is my dad's thing that I inherited that he called magic screwdriver, where it's an aspect of this, of allowing the universe, however it's coming through guidance or otherwise, to provide, where things would just work out correctly. And so the kinds of things that would happen for me is, and this isn't for necessarily a real event, but I would be doing something with other people, or they're doing something, and somehow something would strike me, and I'd turn and reach over and grab some part and turn around, and I don't know why I've got it, but I've got it in my hand just as the person who's doing something needs the part and turns like, oh, there's that thing. And it was just exactly where it was needed.
Mm-hmm. And your explanation of that to yourself was what?
Magic screwdriver.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what do you think is going on?
Guidance, a lot of times. In some cases, it's my own logical mind anticipating things, no doubt. I'm not sure what it all is. In some cases, it clearly came from outside. There were some of the stories from my dad's life are just unbelievable, where things that just simply should not be possible happened.
Yeah, I remember a couple of those stories where they didn't even know the stuff existed, and he went to where it was.
Yeah.
But to my mind, and it's only an idea, but to my mind, it is you, 3D you, functioning very, very smoothly with non-3D you, and it flows through. And so you don't need to have 3D you know what piece it is, but 3D you just needs to follow the impulse to pick up the screwdriver or the
and not suppress it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's hard until you learn, and then it's easy. But until you learn, that's hard because people need reasons to do things. They would seem to.
Well, I had a story I haven't told. An example of that happened is I was visiting at the Environmental Molecular Sciences Laboratory at Pacific Northwest National Labs one day. And it happened they had this carousel of various projects they're working on. And I didn't know the carousel was there. I didn't know the projects were there. It just happened. I looked at one and I thought, and I picked up, I think, 3 of them intentionally, not because they drew my interest or anything. It's just that I knew those 3 were going to be important for some reason. And I took them with me. And it turned out one of them turned out to be really key to what happened next, because what we were trying to do was figure out a way to declassify large reams of information that would help us in the environmental cleanup, but that avoided other issues. Mm-hmm. And it turned out what this included was a particular project they'd been working on, where it was early in the work on network topology system stuff, which is a complex field. But basically what they were doing is they were mining Facebook and other social media to find connections, but not just the connections that were there, to find information that showed that connections existed that they couldn't see. And from that, build a computer topology of where the influences were coming from.
Okay.
Now, as it turned out, there were nefarious reasons that they were doing this, but involved in that also was a different way of searching for things. And where its origin actually came from was a classified project where the Chinese were doing a huge thing that we didn't understand as a nation. And we invested money to figure it out. And part of it was the creation of this tool that sieved through Chinese documents, found connections, and found a way to cluster them so that you could ask a question about it. And what it turned out to be was the Three Gorges Dam project. And so it was no big deal. But what that gave us was this a possibility of saying, hey, we would like to use this particular software called Spire or Starline at the time. That was this weird search engine where we could take classified documents and feed it to it, somebody who has the clearance and all that, have them create the output, declassify the information in the output so that classified information is not present, so that we could then identify specific documents to go look for. The only reason that we were even able to suggest doing that was because I happened to accidentally pick up this sheet about a project that was completely unrelated to anything we were doing. Where'd that come from? But guidance.
Yeah, exactly. I'm, by the way, reading between the lines and not very far between the lines. That had to be a spy project, spying on social media to find relationships between people that were not obvious otherwise. Well, you don't need to confirm or deny. I mean,
well, no. That very much was there. And so this is another aspect. We've talked about many of these that I did in the world where I stuck my thumb in the middle of that one to have that aspect of it shut down.
Were you able to?
Yes.
Yeah, good for you. Are you sure? Or did it just come through some back door?
Well, it resurrects. They always resurrect.
Yeah.
But I was able to get that quashed, at least in that aspect, because and it was clearly present in the document about using this process in these ways that were quite nefarious.
But it wouldn't escape your attention at all that what you described is exactly what AI is doing on a massively bigger scale, finding relationships that are hidden within the data until someone looks in the right direction.
But for different reasons. But yes, there's very much there. But anyway, the whole point of that was that what it was doing is exactly the same sort of thing where guidance in this case, I'm quite certain, was involved of pointing me to certain things, which led me in two very different directions, very different outcomes, each of which was really important. But had I not been there, things would have gone another way. So somehow guidance arranged for me to be in the right place, finding the right thing at the right time, and to be aware enough to notice it.
If it hadn't, it would have looked some other way, more or less. You know the story about how Wilbur Wright figured out how to warp the wings of the airplane to turn it?
Right.
You do know or you don't know?
I've heard it. I don't remember it, but I've heard it.
Well, he was in the bicycle repair business at the time, and bicycle tubes came in this long, flexible carton. And he was talking to a customer with an empty box, and he was just flexing it back and forth like this because, just a movement. But because his mind was super saturated with the whole idea about how do I make one wing go faster than the other in order to turn it, it all percolated. Same thing. What was that? Can you say it was guidance? Sure. Can you say it was his conscious mind? Sure. Can you say it was his unconscious mind? Sure. And what has all of that series of questions gotten you? Nothing. It just worked.
And do you actually need to know how it worked? No.
Even if you could. Yeah, exactly. In fact, if you did know how it worked, I think you'd be likely to polish up the works because you'd be consciously interfering with it. You'd be using all the advantages of beginner's mind, and you'd come up with what should we call a sophomore's mind? Something like that. Now, I can't remember what our topic was. Yes, I can. All right. Well, we haven't gone that far.
We haven't strayed because a lot of what gets involved in this is if we're trying to talk with guidance, people have a tendency, I think, to think, you're going to do an Edgar Casey channeling or, Seth or something.
It's going to look a certain way.
There's a particular mode that it has to be, or that, you're speaking with God or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you can let go of those restrictions and recognize when you're getting information that is from your own subconscious, that's coming from guidance, that's coming from other directions, or maybe coming from other people in the world.
Or a better way to do is not think about where it's coming from. Just look at what you're getting. Am I getting a wider amount of information than I did before? And forget about what gave it to you. Well, and this need the Archangel Gabriel to come down and sign it. I mean,
well, and this also ties to doing things like remote viewing or telepathy and related, things that are considered to be paranormal or whatever, where you're getting information, but you don't necessarily know how you're getting it.
And Dirk, I would argue that we never know, actually.
I agree. But the tendency is that we tend to go to a reductionist thing in the world, that we have eyes, we have ears, we have senses, that the information comes in this particular way. It can't come any other way because we don't know of the way, so therefore it cannot exist. And none of that's true.
John Locke, his whole philosophy based on the idea that people come in tabula rasa. Totally wrong. Totally wrong. And he built his whole long philosophy on it. The whole United States government is based on John Locke's theories, which were based on tabula rasa, which is wrong. You figured out. I don't know. So if somebody is wanting to do these things, they're open to agreeing. I mean, they're listening to us and they're saying, I'll try it out. All right. They've gotten the idea now that they don't have to define ahead of time where the information is coming from. What do we need to tell them more than just be relaxed, be receptive, accept what comes, and then analyze it? Don't try and analyze it while it's coming in. Don't try and analyze it before you got it. It doesn't seem to me like there's much more that's necessary than that.
Well, I think, there's two aspects there that I think they're not identical, but they're close. One of them is, if you're analyzing, if you're cognitively thinking about something and trying to reason your way through it, that will, in and of itself, to a large degree, block input of information.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not bad. It's just that you're processing information. You're analyzing, you're cogitating, you're doing those things. To really get the information, you have to open and be receptive within yourself and outside yourself to allow the information to arrive from whatever source it's arriving from. And then go into the processing part. The other part that goes with that is that if you enter a seeker mode where you're intentionally reaching for things, there's a little bit of the analytical overlay kind of idea where you're trying to set boundaries on how things happen.
And you're very likely to get stuff that you're not looking for and therefore throw it away or not even notice it because, well, this system did. You and I have talked about Bruce Moen's perception and interpretation many times. But one more time, Bruce Moen pointed out perception is one thing, interpretation is another thing. Doing both of them is good a thing to do, but you can't do both at the same time. As soon as you start interpreting, you have stopped perceiving. Now you can stop interpreting again, go back to perceiving, it'll be fine. But you can't do both at the same time, and you sure as hell can't interpret before you perceive. You have nothing you work from. So, which means you can't say, within this limit, I'll say it's possible. But anything beyond that limit is clearly impossible, so it can't happen. Okay, well, good luck with that.
Well, what I would suggest is, I very much agree. I was in that same place for a long time until I finally reached another place where what I describe it as is being able in some circumstances to divide my mind, where a part of my mind is doing the one and a part is doing the other, and they're not entirely connected. In that case, you can do both at the same time, but you have to be very careful.
Well, you're sort of not the same you doing it at the same time, though. It's really almost left brain and right brain. It's what I think is the difference between having your surface mind occupied doing something and that de facto allows your other mind to bring in input. We keep coming back to the same thing. The biggest thing is not to be prejudiced against it ahead of time. If you're open to it, maybe something will happen.
So let me give you a different war story. And this I don't know that it'll give people the idea of it, but it'll give an idea of how much more is possible. As a kid, I remember many times my dad and I would go out fishing. And he particularly would go out to catch salmon and steelhead and trout and whatnot. And we would go out either on the Clackamas River or the Little Sandy or a couple of others. Yeah. And I remember one trip, it was cold, it was wet, it's late fall, I'm freezing to death. We're standing on the edge of the little sandy river, and the silver salmon are running. And my dad has gotten a nibble a couple of times. We haven't landed anything yet. And I was getting into a funk. And so I expressed my dissatisfaction. I'm about 10 years old at the time. And dad just kind of giggled and he says, "What's right there?" "What?" "The fish is right there." "What are you talking about?" He says, "Watch. Here, fishy, fishy, fishy." And he cast, and a silver salmon took that thing 4 feet in the air.
Oh, you were so lucky to have that father.
It's like, how the hell did you do that? And he did it time and time and time again. But what it went to is, going back to something you were saying earlier, is that when you're talking about the carpentry and whatnot, is that one of his common expressions was one that he used as a starter. This isn't the answer. It isn't how you get to the answer. It was taking that pause in the mind, like we talked about in disappointment, of where we've reached a quandary about how to do something, and he would just say, "Well, it's easy. All you do is
And then you would wait for the answer to
wait
surface.
for just a moment," and suddenly he would suggest go somewhere, or I would, and it's like, it was easy. We just had to take that moment to let the inspiration arrive.
Well, I never thought about it, but I've done that as well. And it's very easy. That's the only word you can use. But
Yeah.
I'd actually forgotten about that. I couldn't tell you the specifics, but I remember the emotional end of it, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. And what I take that as is, it is partly the emotional end of it, of getting out of your conscious mind, because you're caught in a circle, you're caught in a trap of thinking within a set loop of things. And what that phrase did was break you out, where you throw that away and now you're open to other things.
I would have said probably the same thing in different words. I would have said it threw your mind into neutral for the moment. And neutral is what you needed, because as long as you were in gear, it was occupied and couldn't get out of gear. But you're in neutral now. Doop.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I suppose we could make a big high flung theory about this, but I don't see a need for it. You have left brain and right brain. They work in different ways. They work together. Sometimes they work separately.
Well, and this is the other thing, we've talked about it a little bit, for me in particular, of taking the time to actually recognize that I have multiple parts within myself. This isn't separate identities. It's different seats of consciousness within my being. And recognizing they each have their own wants and desires, they're experiencing the world somewhat differently, and the blended whole is me. But if I then focus within one part, my logical mind or whatever, and have it have a chance to have an opportunity to commune with another part and have a discussion and have a relationship, amazing things come out. Well, the same way, if you're talking with guidance, if you can do the same thing of pausing, opening to the question, and communing, there it is.
I would say that in that case, you are functioning as their higher mind.
Right.
And the same way that we are trying to connect to our higher mind, using it. You were the it can't be done. It's a fractal kind of a thing, where layer after layer after layer, and they're all structured the same way. And so you are the higher mind to something lower, and you're a part of a higher mind to something higher. And presumably that goes all the way up, turtles all the way up, as well as turtles all the way down.
And the idea that they're not distinct. The fractal idea is true, that they overlap and meld, that there is no firm boundaries in most cases.
They're like, you could call them, they're more like convenient generalizations than like real individuals.
Exactly.
And the generalization can change. And then suddenly it looks like reality has changed, but reality hasn't changed. It's just the way we're experiencing it has changed.
Well, and I think everyone who has driven a car has had that experience, where you've been driving, say, a particular route for a long time, and you finally get to the point you realize, how did I get here?
Yes. Yeah.
Somehow, some part of you took over and drove the car for the last 4 or 5 hours, and you have no conscious awareness of what happened, and yet you were entirely present the entire time.
I used to have to commute an hour and a half each way to work. and this is in New Jersey, which is not particularly fun driving. And it would start at 6 in the morning, and I would wake up somewhere along the road, and I wouldn't know within 3 or 4 miles where I was. Everything was fine. I was, as you said, I was present, and a version of me was present all the time. But that other part of me woke up and would say, let's see, where am I? Not in any kind of a traumatized way. It was just, okay, I guess got to take the wheel again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you can also have an opposite kind of experience. I remember one of the parts of my past is I trained sailors to run nuclear submarines. And we had an event occurred, a real event one day on the reactor. And I won't go into details about what it was. I can't. But as it happened, I had a lieutenant standing right behind me. He was about to relieve me from the watch. He was about to take over. And it just happened that an event occurred where there's a mechanical defect that happened. And it happened because of an operator who was outside who touched a panel, and it created a problem. Well, that caused certain events internally where we could see certain indications that led to a serious indication of an accident. And immediately I began a series of orders that are standard. And very quickly thereafter, the person who had caused the event stepped in and said, wait. And he described very briefly what he had done, which caused me to turn and look at the lieutenant and him to look at me. And we, without saying a word, had a conversation. We now knew exactly where in the circuitry the fault had occurred, what the fault was, why it happened, and the consequences of it. And in about 13 seconds, I gave 13 orders. And it felt like it took about an hour. Everything unfolded as this great, long, slow pageant that happened instantly. And when it was all said and done, there was a couple of the folks involved who were not, they didn't step into that hyper motion thing. They were running at normal speed. And it's like, what just happened?
Yeah. I almost had, this is a trivial example, but I was driving down the road at a fair speed, and somebody coming the other way turned in front of me to go into the driveway. And I had to sort of slam on my brakes to a degree, and then I had to take them off because I didn't want my rear end slamming into the car. So it was just enough to go this way and around them, But in that time slowed down. Time was way slower than I was, and it didn't involve any hurried movement. It just involved my staying aware, and as long as I stayed aware, it was fine. As I say, a trivial example, but the same thing, I think.
So one last war story for me, and this one is a silly and stupid one, but it exemplifies how much more we are, how much more we're capable of, and sometimes the consequences if you take actions involved in it. So I had bought my new car. This is back in 2010, and I was driving up in Portland. Brand new car. Everything is great. It's a glorious day. I'm headed to go visit a friend of mine. And it just happened. A cop pulled out behind me from a side street. And I thought in my mind, I'm invisible. He can't see me. And it wasn't because I was doing anything wrong. It's just proactively avoiding something.
I know where this one goes. Go ahead.
I came up. I stopped at the light. He's right behind me. The light turned green. I started to go. And the gal in front of me turned left immediately and took the bumper off my car. Okay, we pulled over on the street. The cop got out and came and talked to us both, and it's just, I didn't even see you. And I asked the officer what he saw, and he didn't see the accident either.
He didn't notice it, no.
I was invisible to both of them.
I was conflating two stories because somebody else I knew had a story, and they were saying they were invisible on the superhighway because they were speeding a little bit, and their car broke down on the side, and after police car went by, not seeing them until they remembered. I'm not sure if that's poetic justice or what, but anyway.
Well, in my case, it all turned out well. Insurance took care of everything, and everything was back to normal. But it was one of those cases of like, be careful what you ask for. Be careful because you do have the ability to do some of these things, or at least some people do, and sometimes you do.
Well, at some point we might want to talk about I'm not sure it's a good idea or not, but it might be. We might want to talk about some of the really extraordinary things that we have done and seen done that people would basically have to take our word that we're not lying to them.
Oh, yeah.
But if they could hear it, they would realize the world has much more permeable boundaries than it sometimes looks like.
Much more flexible.
As I say, I'm not sure that's a good idea, but maybe we could. We might have to do a little research on that one to think which ones we're going to tell.
Yeah, which ones do we? Yeah, some of them are embarrassing.
Gee, I wouldn't know what that feels like.
No.
Well, I don't know if we covered the territory or not, but that's as close as we're going to come, I think.
Well, and I hope people have enjoyed this and find something useful in it. For these two, I don't think we really knew exactly where we were going when we started. I think we've covered a lot of interesting territory, and it's always fun to chat.
You say that as if we ever knew where we were going.
True.
All right. Well,
but actually, that goes to the point that in allowing for things to unfold naturally, that's where a lot of the magic happens.
Sure.
And it's a great place to live.
Actually, maybe we ought to do a piece on magic. Some of the essentials that people don't think of in terms of magic. That they may think of in terms of psychology or of other things, but that might be something to do. I wish we could get Dave here to do it and do it in a shamanic. Maybe we can do it.
Let's do that. Or maybe we'll tell the ice cream story.
I got one scoop. All right. Next time. Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode, please press like. Please press subscribe to stay informed of new episodes as they appear. We would love to hear from you in the comments section below, and we wish you the very best in connecting with your own guidance.